So you want to know more about Mormonism and white Christian nationalism. Few topics have received as much attention from scholars in recent years than the rise of what's called white Christian nationalism, those who believe that the United Nation is founded on Christian ideals, biblical values, and in the view of some, should be dominated by those who share those Christian interests, which often has a racial component to it. And connected to that fascination with white Christian nationalism is the place in which Mormonism fits within that broader construct, because Latter-day Saints themselves have recently, or at least many of them, come to embrace this notion of white Christian nationalism. In a recent survey, 4 out of 10 Latter-day Saints would say that they believe in white Christian nationalism. Now, scholars have done a lot to try to explain this growing phenomenon, both in the broader context of American religious history, but also within the particular Mormon context, because Mormons fit into this coalition quite awkwardly, though also quite earnestly. And we get one of the best academic interventions and explanations of this dynamic in the newest issue of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, one of the most important cultural repositories of Mormon scholarship and culture. Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought has this recent article by Dr. Matthew Harris titled "Saving the Constitution with White Christian Nationalism: Ezra Taft Benson, W. Cleon Skousen, and their attempt to solicit the help of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover." It's a phenomenal article that I really strongly recommend. And so in this video, I'm going to provide a brief background to scholarship on white Christian nationalism and Mormonism's component, and then I'm going to interview Dr. Harris himself to get from him what he tried to accomplish from this article, and hopefully to encourage all of you to go read the article yourself. So in this video, I'm going to talk about white Christian nationalism, what scholars have said about it. I'm going to talk about some of the excellent scholarly interventions into Mormonism's place within that white Christian nationalism. And then I'm going to have my interview with Dr. Harris. So make sure to stick around to the end for that interview. But before we dig in, my awkward but constant and necessary plug that if you enjoy this type of nerdy analysis, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Please hit the like button so that this video can reach a broader discussion with others. Leave a comment of what you think I missed. Every Friday, I do these types of "So You Want to Know More About X" videos where I peel back the curtain to talk about how these historical works are done. On Mondays, I do deep dives on particular topics, and on Wednesdays, I typically do videos that connect the past to the present. Although this Wednesday, November 5th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, I'm going to be doing a live discussion here on this YouTube channel. So please mark your calendar. Please make sure you're subscribed so you can show up when the live discussion starts at 7 p.m. I'll be talking about some of the videos I've done over the last month, and most importantly, answering questions you might have. So again, this Wednesday, November 5th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, a live discussion on this very channel. All right, let's get back to today's topic. There have been a number of wonderful books on the intersections of religion and the state, and especially the question of white Christian nationalism in American history. But I'm just going to highlight 4 in this video. And these 4 books are books that I have taught in the classroom, that I've recommended to others, and I know work quite well in directly addressing popular questions. And I want to emphasize, or at least summarize, some of their key points. I'm going to talk about 2 books that discuss the founding of America, and then 2 books that discuss the modern incarnation. Now, when you want to talk about the founding in the era, America, the most common question asked is, were the founding fathers religious? Did they envision creating a Christian nation? The answer is not yes, but it's also not a full-throated no either. There's complexity layered, as I've discussed in a previous video. Lots of founding fathers believe different things of what religion and politics should be and how they should intersect. One of the best books that give a broad overview of this is Frank Lambert's book, The Founding Fathers and the Place of Religion in America, published by Princeton University Press over 2 decades ago. This book directly addresses the question of, was America established on these Christian principles? And his answer is no, in the sense that you had the planting founders, those initial religious visionaries or colonists who came over and did try to establish a religious nation only to be supplanted later on by those who had a much more varied and complicated view of religion. The book looks into the diversity among those founding figures, especially those who helped craft the state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution. And if you want to dig more into that question of was America founded as a Christian nation, there's a book by that very title by John Fea, Was America Founded as a Christian Nation, published by John Knox Westminster Press, a wonderful survey that makes what I think is a crucial distinction of creating a secular government that's filled with religious people. And it talks about both the founding era and the eventual democratization of religion in the decades that followed. Between those two books, by Frank Lambert and by John Fea, you will get a great perspective of the diversity of religious ideas that really transcend the small parochial box that we typically try to place on those founding figures. But then there's the modern incarnation, the rise of this white Christian nationalism in the last 7 decades or so following World War II. This is perhaps the most active field of American religious historiography, and I could highlight a dozen of important books, some of which I've highlighted in previous Friday videos, but today I just want to highlight 2 and summarize some of their key contributions. These are 2 recent books that really respond to our current era, our current moment, by providing some historiographical background. The first is Lerone Martin's The Gospel of J. Edgar Hoover, How the FBI Aided and Abetted the Rise of White Christian Nationalism. This book is especially appropriate for the article that we're going to be discussing later from Matt Harris. But Lerone Martin, the Martin Luther King Jr. professor of religious studies at Stanford University, uses the persona of J. Edgar Hoover to understand this politicized, patriarchal, partisan view of white Christian nationalism that Hoover himself inhabited and that he used the FBI to try to spread, showing that those institutions tried to implement an ideal of white Christian nation on the broader world, including in their conflicts with other Christian movements like the civil rights movement. And one other book I want to highlight is Bradley Onishi's book, Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next, which gives you an excellent summary of how that ideology, especially the dominionist theology, that it's the goal of these religious communities to take an overwhelming power or control over society and government and culture, something that's a crucial issue right now, how that had come to be. So I strongly recommend both these books, Martin's The Gospel of J. Edgar Hoover and Onishi's Preparing for War. I will also recommend here on YouTube the wonderful Pat Conkey's channel, Culture, Faith, and Politics. Pat himself is a Christian evangelical minister who has done a lot to try to push back on this white Christian nationalism, and I was very privileged to join his channel a couple months ago. And if you want a perspective, someone from within those trenches trying to fight back against white Christian nationalism, his channel is a wonderful example. So how do Mormons fit into this broader story? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a very complicated question that does not have a straight answer. It was very complicated in the 19th century, where Mormons, for their part, did envision some elements of white Christian nationalism. The Doctrine and Covenants sacralized at least some portions of the Constitution, especially those that had to do with religious liberty. You can go back and watch previous videos I've done on this. But at the same time, Mormons were often the targets of white Christian nationalists in America, who, on their moral crusade to cleanse America of its wicked practices, Mormon polygamy was at the head of that initiative. And so the LDS faithful were often those who were oppressed by white Christian nationalism, even while they themselves had, to an extent, given up faith in the modern American institution, while still holding on to a divine origins of America, that the American nation had apostatized, just like Christianity had apostatized. But in the 20th and 21st century, we see a reversal on that, because as Latter-day Saints become enshrined in the religious right movement. And white evangelicals who are pushing this white Christian nationalism are now defining their boundaries of the movement around politics and culture rather than theology. That enables some space for Latter-day Saints to take part. That's one of the striking things of the religious right coalition, is its interdenominational aspect and fusion of this cultural identities, especially patriarchy and politics, over what had used to be doctrinal fidelity, which enabled people like Mormons to participate because they could work with them on these crucial political and cultural issues like homosexuality, for instance. And there have been some key figures in this story, two of whom are at the center of Matt Harris's book, book and article. Ezra Taft Benson, who was an apostle and later an LDS prophet, he served in Dwight Eisenhower's cabinet and became one of the foremost speakers of what we might call the John Birch style of anti-communism, which had distinct Christian nationalist undertones. You also had Cleon Skousen, who framed Christian nationalism for millions in the 20th century. I'm just getting started on a project on Cleon Skousen, so he's on my mind a lot, which can be a complicated thing, but he envisions this idea of not just a Christian origins, but Christian principles for how American society should operate. And we see, building on those two historical figures, more recent figures like Glenn Beck, the political partisan who is pushing a sense of right-wing politics, building on those foundations of Benson and Skousen. You have John McNaughton, the painter, who places on canvas these types of Christian nationalist ideas, most prominently his One Nation Under God painting, but there are a number that we could highlight, and I'll get into more of that in a bit. Now, two articles that I want to highlight. One final figure that I do want to highlight, because he would be offended if I didn't bring him up, I'm sure, in this context, is Tim Ballard, who wrote a series of books that embedded a Mormon Christian nationalism to the point of where not only was George Washington a Christian, he was also led by the angel Moroni. Not only was Abraham Lincoln pushing Christian values, but he was inspired by the Book of Mormon. You can see that fusion of Christian nationalism with Mormon theology. Now, I want to highlight two wonderful articles that have come out by the promising young scholar Nicholas Shrum, who is a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Virginia. He published two articles that I think are worth your time, and I'm linking to both of them in the video description. The first is Materializing Faith and Politics, the Unseen Power, the NCCS Pocket Constitution, American Religion. That was published by Dialogue. That looks at how Cleon Skousen created this National Constitution Center that produced this very brief pocket constitution, a constitution that you can see both in Mike Lee. Here's a picture of Mike Lee waving around that pocket constitution, as well as Ammon Bundy, who also has waved around that pocket constitution. You can see it popping out of his own pocket. What does it mean that Cleon Skousen came to shape these ideas of Christian nationalism on a broader stage? This article digs into how Mormonism subtly infiltrated Christian nationalist discourse just through the lens of that particular document. And then Shrum also published an article in Journal of Mormon History titled Mormon American Nationalism and the Religio-Political Art of John McNaughton. So John McNaughton, as I mentioned before, one of the most prominent painters of MAGA Christianity, by recasting these historical figures as proto-Christians, he is placing on canvas much of these Christian nationalist myths. And by the way, if you want to go a bit deeper on this Christian nationalism, I also wrote an article that came out last year in the Journal of Media and Religion titled The Unlikely Alliance of Mormonism and Christian Nationalism. If you want to read that, I'll put the link in the description as well, although it's behind a paywall, so make sure you have a library that has a subscription to that journal. All right. All of that is background. Now to my great pleasure, having an interview with Dr. Matt Harris, the author of this new article, Saving the Constitution Through White Christian Nationalism, about both Benson and Skousen. I think Harris is someone who does not need much introduction. He's the author of a number of important works, including Watchmen on the Tower, Ezra Taft Benson, and the Making of the Mormon Right, as well as more recently, Second Class Saints, Black Mormons, and the Struggle for Racial Equality, which won the JWHA Best Book Award. So without further ado, let's get to the interview with Dr. Harris. All right. Well, I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Matt Harris. I will say that he holds the distinction of the person who is cited most frequently in all of my TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube videos where people will be like, "Have you read the latest Matt Harris book or article?" So it feels like your name is evoked so often, it seems appropriate to now have you on. I've already talked about in this video a little bit about the background of white Christian nationalism, where Mormon fits in, and this brings us to your wonderful new article just out in Dialogue. So first of all, Dr. Harris, why don't you tell us, how does this article build on your recent scholarship, like your book on Ezra Taft Benson or your book on Mormonism and race in the 20th century?
Well, when I wrote the Ezra Taft Benson book, Watchmen on the Tower, it came out in 2020. I didn't have access to Cleon Skousen and Ezra Benson's, at least the full FBI files. I had some of the files, to be clear, but I didn't have full access. And so when I filed a FOIA request after the book came out, I recognized that there was a deeper story here that needed to be told. And, it doesn't take a genius to read Elder Benson's books to realize he loved J. Edgar Hoover. But it was extraordinary to me when I got the FBI files that he and Hoover were exchanging letters. They were inviting each other to Christmas parties. I mean, there was a closeness there that one doesn't normally get with the FBI director of the United States. So he was also, I was struck that Benson's inviting him, trying to get him to speak in General Conference, trying to publish his writings in the improvement era at the time. I mean, this is the equivalent of, one of the apostles today in the Quorum of the 12 inviting Kash Patel to speak in General Conference next week. I mean, it's just inconceivable, but that's what Benson was doing.
So we're going to get to Hoover and the FOIA documents, the FBI records in a bit. But for now, why don't you dig into a bit? So white Christian nationalism has justifiably gotten a lot of attention from scholars in recent years. So why don't you define how you define white Christian nationalism as it's currently believed and expressed and used in modern America, as well as how Mormons fit into this white Christian nationalist movement?
Yeah, so the white Christian nationalist ideology it's pretty simple. The nation was based on the Bible. The laws are biblically based. The founding fathers are biblical Christians. And the presupposition is, of course, that the country strayed away from those biblical roots, and that in order to survive as a country, it needs to return to those biblical roots. And of course, there's a racial component to it when folks in the 20th century have invoked white Christian nationalism, either consciously or subconsciously. They're talking about white people. They're not talking about people of color. And some of the more radical, I think, white Christian nationalists today will be just open about their racism. Others will be more subtle about it. But that's really what it is. It's also, there's a gendered component to it. We're talking about men. There's a sexual component to it. We're talking about heteronormative men. And so in the church today, that the church is certainly, the LDS Church supports all of that, what I just said. But yet the church is not unique because this has been embedded into the church's theology ever since Joseph Smith founded the church in 1830. And the scriptures, as you know, Ben, is, the Doctrine and Covenants in particular, offers this exceptionalist narrative with the Constitution, the founding fathers being these wise men whom God raised up. So, and I'll just say one thing that's interesting about the Latter-day Saint experience, that Latter-day Saints, like others who believe in white Christian nationalism, what we see in the 20th century is that laissez-faire capitalism gets worked into it. And so when Latter-day Saints talk about saving the Constitution, it's not just saving that document, it's preserving capitalism from liberals. And that's what Cleon Skousen and Ezra Benson will promote.
Yeah, and so another element that might surprise a lot of readers is, what the heck does J. Edgar Hoover have to do with all this? You think of J. Edgar Hoover as the law and order man, the G man, who led the FBI for nearly 5 decades. How does he play a role in this white Christian nationalism?
So he's one of the most popular men in the United States for much of the 20th century. And just for your listeners, he's takes over the FBI position in 1935, and he stays until 1971. He's the longest tenured FBI director in the nation's history. And he comes of age fighting against immigrants, oddly enough. He's arresting so-called anarchists. He's arresting people who are violating the Immigration Act of 1924. He's sending his G-men after them. Obviously, parallels today with these kinds of things. And so Americans they love this guy, and they're riding off of this wave of xenophobia. And Cleon Skousen applies to, he's a Latter-day Saint man, taught at BYU in the religion department for a number of years. But before he taught at BYU, he worked for the FBI for about, I think, 13 years. And he got to be fairly close to Director Hoover. And then, of course, Ezra Benson became the Secretary of Agriculture and moved with his family to Washington in 1953. And he too got to be close with Hoover. And so Benson and Skousen, who were neighbors in Salt Lake and close friends and close confidants, they recognized that Hoover and his brand of white Christian nationalism could benefit the Latter-day Saints. And just to develop that point very quickly, Hoover required his agents to read the Bible. He required them to go to biblical study camps in the summers. He had a handful of African Americans, but most definitely his bureau was overwhelmingly white. He was a Presbyterian when he grew up, but he wasn't really a practicing Presbyterian in his adult years. And anyway, so he was frequently giving talks about the way to defend this country, the way to defeat communism is by going to church, reading the Bible, having these strong Christian values, which is so ironic because he wasn't really a practicing Christian himself as an adult. But hey, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, so what were then some of Skousen and Benson's most important contributions to this broader discourse of white Christian nationalism?
Well, I mean, they're sharing it. This is the church. They're the ones that are defining this in the LDS Church. I don't think, other than when both of these men speak on the John Birch speakers circuit, in which they reach a broader audience beyond Latter-day Saints. I mean, Skousen and Benson are defining what it means to be a Latter-day Saint politically and culturally in the church with their incessant views that they're foisting upon the saints, whether it's in General Conference or BYU devotionals or in their writings that LDS publishing houses are publishing. And I mean, Ben, you're an author. I'm an author. There are lots of ways to influence people today, not just social media, but writing books. And it's Skousen and Benson whose books the saints are reading. And so if you want to influence, anybody in the 20th century, you can write a book, you can write an article, or you can go on the radio. They don't have these various modalities that we have today. And so Benson and particularly Skousen are popular authors, and the saints are reading their stuff, and this is their orientation into white Christian nationalism.
So, given what appears to be aligned interests, why did J. Edgar Hoover keep Benson and Skousen at arm's length?
Well, so ideologically, I mean, they're bedfellows. There's no question about it. And so when they read his writings, Hoover wrote a book called Masters of Deceit. It was a bestseller in 1958, and Skousen and Benson loved it. They want to use it in the church's priesthood quorums. So they recognized that he could do something, offer something to the church. But so ideologically, they were on the same page. But when Benson left his government service in 1961, I guess, when Eisenhower's second term was up, Benson became affiliated with the John Birch Society. It's an anti-communist advocacy group that had the rare distinction of being the most radical group in the mid 20th century. And radical meaning that Eisenhower, this popular five-star general, is a communist, which is strange because Benson worked for him. That's strange. And Eisenhower's cabinet, John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, his brother, Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA, they're all commies. I mean, it was never ending. And so Benson picked up on this stuff, and Skousen was right along with them. And they're touting this stuff publicly, these conspiracy theories. And it gets back to Hoover that these two guys that he was once close with, this is what they're doing. And he says in private, he says that anybody who thinks General Eisenhower is a communist has something seriously wrong with him. And so, I mean, what he's saying is Benson and Skousen have something seriously wrong with them. And so that's what he does. And so what's interesting from the FBI files, Ben, is that it was comical to me, as a scholar, I'm reading this stuff. And Benson and his son Reed Reed was a younger man at the time, later become a BYU religion professor. But in Reed's first career aspiration, it was to work for the FBI. And so Ezra would bring him to Washington and cold calls because they wouldn't return his phone calls. So they would just show up on his doorstep. And one of Director Hoover's minions would say, "Hey, the Bensons are here to see you." And he would say, "Tell them I'm not at my office." And he would he would give him the arm's length. With Skousen would go on the speakers circuit for the John Birch Society. Thousands of people, including Latter-day Saints and non-Latter-day Saints, would hear him speak. And he would the stars are falling. The whole world's falling apart. Communism is out to get us. And so these people would write Director Hoover and say, we heard one of your former agents, he said he was really close to you. And can you verify what he's saying is true, that the commies are really making greater inroads than anyone could imagine? And Hoover just did not like to politicize the Bureau, even though he himself was a diehard partisan. So he wanted to project that image that they were neutral. And Hoover would write back and he would say, Cleon who? Barely knew the guy. But yet we've got letters, between these two that there's a mutual affection there, at least early on.
It reminded me of Beverly Gage's wonderful A Massive Biography in J. Edgar Hoover, where when talking about Joseph McCarthy, that Hoover very sophisticatedly used McCarthy as a foil to say that's the irresponsible anti-communism, to validate I'm doing the responsible patriotic anti-communism. And so I kind of see that dynamic at play, like Skousen and Benson, they're off on their ledge, which is going to validate me as the much more moderate form. Let's go to your sources, because I love your use of these FOIA requests, the Freedom of Information Act requests. Can you talk about some of these sources that, have only been available recently, and how you approach those types of tools?
Yeah, so years ago, when Lee Davidson of the Salt Lake Tribune did an article, Davidson used to work for the Desert News, and then he switched over to the Trib. I think he's retired now. But years ago, he published a little article about Benson and his relationship with Hoover. This is just the Tribune, so it's not, long. And it said that it was based on some FBI records that Davidson had gotten a hold of. And so I reached out to him and I said, "Can you share these?" And he did. He said, "But there's a lot more that I don't have." And so I filed a full FOIA request, big, thick thing. And the same thing happened to me with Skousen in a different way. There's this man whose name is Ernie Laser. He lived in, I think, Texas, Ben, your home state. He's now since passed away a couple of years ago. And he reached out to a bunch of scholars like me. I was one of them. Matthew Dalek wrote a wonderful book on the John Birch Society. Reached out to Matt Dalek. And he said, "I've got all these files on these right-wing people. Would you like some of them?" And I'm like, yeah. And so Ernie sent me a pretty big file on Skousen, and he filed a FOIA request. But Ernie also said, like Lee Davidson, "I didn't get the full one, so you might apply for it." And I did. And so I supplemented the stuff that Ernie gave me with the FOIA request. And, for those of your listeners who aren't historians, it's whenever you get to see these private letters, you really get a sense how they're thinking, what they're feeling, because this is not meant for public consumption. This is an FBI file. And frankly, Benson and Skousen had no idea what's going into their file. And probably when Hoover created this, I don't think he thought that people like me would be filing FOIA requests, 6 decades later, but here we are. And so when you see these private things, you really get a sense of the sequence of events, what they're thinking, and also, frankly, their impact on people, because people wrote Director Hoover about Benson and Skousen, and they would either praise or criticize them. Let me say one last little thing while we're on this topic that struck me. A lot of things struck me, actually, is reading Benson's file, the degree to which he really clung on to Hoover and his love for Hoover well after Hoover died. Hoover dies in 1972, and Benson's still writing different people, including a guy named Mike Webster, who directed the FBI in the late 1970s. And he's writing Director Webster saying, "Oh, Hoover was great. You've got big shoes to fill." But one of the things that struck me was that in June of 1978, when they lifted the priesthood and temple ban, and Benson ultimately came over to it, albeit reluctantly. But about 3 weeks later, Benson's writing Jimmy Carter and others saying, we've got commies in the government everywhere. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, the church just did this momentous, thing, the most important thing in the history of the church, other than probably the lifting of polygamy. And this is
His
what's on his
attention's already
mind.
turned again.
This is what's on his mind. It should have been, how are we going to globalize the church? How are we going to send missionaries into sub-Saharan Africa? But now he's talking about commies.
We need to
The
get these
Carter
commies out.
I mean,
I,
I laughed. I laughed when I read this.
I also just love the irony of these secret files kept on Benson, given that he would later keep secret files on LDS intellectuals. That's like there's some poetic justice there. So briefly, we're now in an era that might be the culmination of these trajectories you were writing about, or maybe the end of those trajectories, because it seems like we're in an awkward place with Mormons and white Christian nationalism today, even with developments in the last month or so. Do you see right now as the fulfillment of what's come before, or do you see things potentially changing once again?
I don't think these things changing, because the issue is, so just to be clear, in 2023, there's a Pew poll that said that, let's see, 4 in 10 Latter-day Saints identify with white Christian nationalism. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And so the reason why I don't see things changing is because the leadership in Salt Lake, the brethren, as I call them, they'll never denounce this stuff, because there are so many folks who identify either overtly as a white Christian nationalist, or subvertly or covertly. I mean, they identify with its principles, even though they can't put a name to it. And so there's a lot of those folks out there, and the church just doesn't want to go on record and denounce them. But I know as sure as I'm talking to you, that a lot of the members of the Quorum of the 12 do not like this stuff. It's embarrassing. It's bad for the church. It's bad for its missionary endeavors globally. And, I know the new president, President Oaks, is not a MAGA person. He's not a white Christian nationalist. He's on record, at least in private, that I know of. I know people who know him personally who said he can't stand any of the stuff. So anyway, but they won't denounce it because they'll lose too many people if they do.
Mm-hmm. So let's close this discussion. We're doing a bit of an interinstitutional collaboration here, because currently I am privileged to be the sitting president of the Mormon History Association, and you are the sitting president of our sister organization, sibling organization, John Whitmer Historical Association, both scholarly organizations that date back decades. My first academic paper ever was at a John Whitmer conference. So, and I've been back probably 10 times since then. So I want to give you a platform right now. Pitch to the audience. Why should they have JWHA on their radar?
Boy, I mean, I love both. So there's my bias. I love the MHA. I love the JWHA. They're a little bit different, though. There's lots of crossover. But one of the differences with the JWHA is we probably have more restorationist participation from different restoration groups. And so we get the Strangites and the Bickertonites, and not to say that MHA is not a welcoming place for that either, but we get more of that in the JWHA. It's a smaller organization, it's more intimate. And so that means that we have, I don't know, 200 people come to our conferences, and I'm not sure what it is with the MHA, Ben, but it's much bigger. And so we follow church history sites. And so we study history at the sites where the history occurred. And it's a smaller, more intimate feeling. And it started in the early 70s with the Community of Christ, or RLDS at the time. And so there's a really tightness between LDS scholars and JWHA Community of Christ scholars. So we just had our conference last month in the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. And we had Stacey Cram, their new prophet president. She was ordained in June. She was a keynote speaker. So there's that kind of intimacy where we got to talk to her and hang out with her for a little bit. And it's really, if anybody's listening and you're curious and you want to participate, submit a paper. Go to the JWHA website and you'll see the submission process. We would love to consider your work.
I'm sad to say I don't think we're going to have Dallin H. Hoke speaking at MHA's conference next year. So you got a leg up on us. Where is the conference going to be next year?
It's going to be in Nebraska. Where is it, Nebraska? It's not winter quarters. Oh my gosh, I should know this.
But like nearby winter quarters, right?
It's going to be nearby winter quarters. Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, Dr. Harris. The article is Saving the Constitution by White Christian Nationalism. You can go find it at the Dialogue Journal's website right now. I hope you found that interview useful. I certainly did. Dr. Harris is always quite smart and erudite when trying to explain these important lessons, and I think his articles are often groundbreaking. I have a feeling this article on saving the Constitution through white Christian nationalism is going to be an article that's cited and engaged for generations. And in many ways, I frequently say that Matt Harris is the new D. Michael Quinn, and that he blends both extensive, exhaustive archival research with also citing all these broader books that give us the bigger picture that have a lot of lessons for the Latter-day Saint community. So if you take one thing from this video, I hope you go and read that article. By the way, if you want a longer discussion on the current moment of Mormonism, white Christian nationalism, I was very privileged to join Nicholas Shrum, the author of the articles that I mentioned before, on a podcast for Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. The same journal that published Dr. Harris's article had me and Dr. Shrum, soon to be Dr. Shrum, on to discuss current Mormonism and white Christian nationalism and evangelicalism. I'll add a link to that discussion in the video description as well. I hope you found this video useful. If so, please make sure to hit the like button and share it with others. Consider subscribing to this channel, and if you want to give back, you can become a member of a channel that allows me and my wonderful producer, Anthony, to continue doing what we do. We are so, so grateful for those of you who have chosen to support us in that way. History has never been more relevant than it is today because it enables us to place these current fascinations like white Christian nationalism in a much longer context, seeing how we got to this moment, which should hopefully give us some context on where we can go from here.